4 minutes, Senator.
The question is pretty straightforward in relation to what the proposals are for bringing forward domestic violence legislation this year. But I'll speak on behalf of the many thousands of victims out there and victims-to-be that are looking for a permanent solution in this area. A number of things have happened over the last number of months. We had to get the Justice Committee report itself, which really should be implemented in its entirety. Absolutely, that's one step where we need to go. The Garda Inspector's report itself showed serious deficiencies in both their recording of crimes themselves and their actual dealing with those later. I could point you to the DASH system in the North of Ireland, which is their system for recording all crimes of sexual and domestic violence nature. I've sent a copy of that to your office recently, and to the new Garda Commissioner, Noreen O'Sullivan. I don't believe that the old days of the black notebook and going back putting it up in the pulse system is the way to do business. And I think we now need... and again, an awful lot of this stuff, we have a terrible thing in Ireland of trying to reinvent something. They've already got it in the North of Ireland. They have a cousin working in the PSNI. That's where I got that information from. I believe that that's what we need to implement here. I think the implementation of the EU Victims Directive, this must be done this year, and the ratification of the Istanbul Convention on Domestic Violence must be done this year. But above all, proper legislation now needs to be put in place. Friends of mine in the Gardaí pointed me to the 2002 Children's Welfare Act and the 2014 Animal Welfare Act, whereby we have penalties in the Animal Welfare Act of 2014 of powers, detention, imprisonment and fines that if I hit a dog a kick up in the backside, I can be detained for 7 days with a fine of up to €250,000. But we have little or nothing to protect somebody over 18, male or female. So we've already got the powers, we've already got the acts, and I would plead with you, Minister, inside 2015, let's bring it in, and let's do it this year. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank the Senator for raising the issue of domestic violence in this House. I'm very conscious of your interest in this issue and your contribution to the report last October to the Oireachtas Joint Committee on Justice, Defence and Equality on Domestic and Sexual Violence. As I have said before, the Government is committed to introducing consolidated and reformed domestic violence legislation to address all aspects of domestic violence, threatened violence and intimidation in a way that provides protection to victims. We also, of course, have the sexual offences legislation, the heads of which have been published recently. In relation to the domestic violence legislation, the draft general scheme of the legislation is being finalised in my department, and there's a number, approximately 8 new sections. We're bringing all of the legislation together from the various acts over the years, which I think will be very important, that we have one consolidated piece of legislation and approximately 8 new provisions to strengthen the legislation. My intention is that it will be considered by Government shortly after Easter. Following approval by the Government of the general scheme of the bill, I will forward it to the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Justice, Defence and Equality for pre-legislative scrutiny, and that will give an opportunity for further consultation with stakeholders on the bill, following on from their inputs into the Joint Committee's hearings in relation to domestic and sexual violence in February. And my aim is, Senator, that the legislation will be enacted this year. I contributed to a debate in Dáil Éireann in December last year where I said that domestic violence does not go away. While domestic violence does not go away completely, we can and must do more to assist those affected by it, I agree with you, and to punish those inflicting the pain and misery associated with it. I believe that we have a good structured base with which to work and that we can improve it with the proposed legislation. The Istanbul Convention will also provide for the highest standards to be met in addressing domestic violence. And I'm pleased to say that at this point I have now got a response from every government department in relation to the provisions of the Istanbul Convention, which means that we now have the summary proposals from government departments which will allow us to go ahead and sign the Istanbul Convention in the first place and then publish an action plan towards ratification. And I intend that we would hope to sign it in the early part of this year. In tackling the difficult issue of domestic violence, legislation can provide a framework for victims and on Garda Síochána. But of course that must be complemented, as you have said, by operational policing on the ground. The Garda Commissioner has announced the plans to develop a system of risk assessment in relation to victims of domestic violence who come to the attention of Garda Síochána. I think that's very important, particularly following on from the Garda Inspector's report, where a number of very serious issues were identified in relation to the investigation of domestic violence and domestic abuse. And the Garda Commissioner has announced a series of initiatives in relation to the reorganisation of how child protection and sexual and domestic violence are dealt with within Garda Síochána, and I think that will also help to deal more effectively with reports of domestic violence and domestic abuse, as well as the decision to have 2 officers in every division who have responsibility for victims. I think that's an extremely good initiative. There are many cases of members of Garda Síochána extending themselves above and beyond the call of duty to assist victims as well, and I think that's acknowledged by all. And I would say there has been a sea change in relation to this issue in Garda Síochána, but there is more to be done, and I think that has been acknowledged both as a result of the findings of the Garda Inspectorate report, but also I think the actions taken by the Garda Commissioner indicate the seriousness with which the issue is now being taken. They're not always that straightforward. A risk assessment system which is tuned to the realities of operational policing can help Garda Síochána better protect victims from more serious re-victimisation in the future. And I'd like to thank you for raising the issue today.
Question, Senator.
The Minister for her comprehensive response. And again, as I said, we have to do this year. You know, it's an issue that's close to my heart. She'd certainly know that. As I said, it's not a criticism of the Gardaí, I suppose, in a sense, but it's an observation of their recording system. We don't have to travel only 50 miles, whatever it's 60 miles up the road, or 80 miles up to Newry, and they're doing it differently there. So I've actually sent a template of that to the Garda Commissioner herself and to your office last week. I would strongly suggest, and I made this point at the Justice Committee, the scene of the crime is the first place we must record the right information, and that is not happening at the moment. If we had a template at the beginning protecting the women, the children, the families, the men, whoever in this situation, recording that properly, and the dash system, the PSNI have it, that's where we need to start from. The legislation and punishments and treatments coming at the back end. But I would hope that maybe the template that I've sent would actually start to be used or put in place in the pilot programme, indeed. And I have no doubt the Garda Commissioner takes this very seriously. And I do welcome last week's changes as well. Thank you, Minister.
As I said, Senator, the Commissioner has now reorganised the structure of the forces approach to domestic violence with the appointment of the Chief Superintendent to oversee the new unit under the auspices of the National Support Service. So it's the Child Protection, Domestic Violence and Human Exploitation Unit. And I think the operational points that you make are very critical. And I have no doubt that, again, given the findings in relation to crime investigation that were in the Garda Inspectorate report, that matter will be followed up by Garda Síochána, not just in relation to domestic violence, but equally in relation to the investigation of other serious crime. That's a very real issue for the force to examine, and I will certainly examine as well the material that you sent me in relation to initiatives being taken in other forces, and we'll ask Garda Síochána for a response to that.
Thank you, Minister. Third motion, Senator Bacic.